Man goes missing in New York and somehow ends up in California. This is the mystery of how a 49-year-old Canadian firefighter who was skiing at Whiteface Mountain with colleagues in New York went missing one day, only to be found 6 days later alive and in good health, but in Sacramento. According to his friends, on February 7th, Constantinos Danny Philippidis said he wanted to go on one last ski run that day. However, that was the last time they saw him, as he never returned. This prompted a frantic search for Philippidis that included a helicopter, K9 units, and up to 140 trekking through the snowy mountains in the hopes of finding him. At one point, Philippidis apparently bought an iPhone, which he used to call his wife. She urged him to call the police, who eventually caught up with him, reportedly still in his ski clothes, at Sacramento Airport, some 2,900 miles away from where he was last seen. Authorities said Philippidis seemed to be confused and wasn't able to give them direct answers. Here's what they did discover, though. Philippidis didn't remember much, but felt he may have suffered a head injury. He also mentioned that he had been riding in a big rig-style truck and also spent a lot of time sleeping. He also apparently got a haircut. Authorities have distributed this picture of Philippidis taken while he was in California in the hopes that people who recognize him can help fill in what happened when he went missing for 6 days. Perhaps he was simply in a fugue state? Sometimes it's not easy finding your way home. Americans rescued after being lost at sea for 5 months. 2 Americans lost at sea for 5 months in the Pacific were rescued by the U.S. Navy after being spotted by a Taiwanese fishing boat. Jennifer Appel and Tasha Fuyaba left Hawaii for Tahiti this spring with their 2 dogs, but their engine failed on May 30th during a storm. The pair continued on, hoping to reach land by sail. They began issuing daily distress calls for 2 months, but were too far out to be heard by anyone. On Tuesday, a Taiwanese fishing boat spotted the pair 900 miles southeast of Japan and contacted the U.S. Coast Guard in Guam. The USS Ashland arrived the next morning to pick the women and their pooches up. Appel and Fuyaba were able to survive because they had water purifiers and more than a year's worth of food on board. Sheesh, these 2 had more food on their boat than most Americans have at home. Something smells fishy. Last week, everyone collectively awed as 2 women and their dogs were rescued after being stranded at sea for months. But now eyebrows are being raised because details of the sailor's story just don't add up. A night after setting off from Hawaii on May 3rd, a ferocious storm supposedly broke apart the boat's mast and sail, even though no storm systems were spotted in the area that day or in the days after. At the end of the first month, another supposed storm killed their engine and left them drifting. They had 6 forms of communication devices, but all were dead. The pair apparently had an emergency position indicating radio beacon on board, which when activated tells the Coast Guard you need rescuing. And the device was working properly, but for some reason the women didn't think the situation was distressing enough to warrant turning it on. For people who didn't need saving, they sure were diligent in sending up flares every time they passed a ship or island. It's both odd and a bit dumb that the 2 went on a long sea journey just after a week of knowing each other, and with one of them having no sailing experience whatsoever. Many netizens are now speculating these 2 might just be in it for publicity, maybe a book and movie deal? Then again, they might just be 2 inexperienced and overly ambitious sailors who made some very stupid decisions. In any case, the Coast Guard in Hawaii is looking into it, so we'll hopefully have the real story soon.
Teens rescued after spending 3 days in Paris catacombs. 2 teenagers learned the hard way why you're not supposed to venture into the restricted areas of the underground ossuaries in Paris. The catacombs underneath the city of Paris hold the remains of more than 6 million people. Enthusiasts of the catacombs, known as cataphiles, often illegally enter parts of the tunnels not open to the public via secret entrances. The 2 teenagers who were lost there spent 3 days in the dark and cold narrow passageways and developed hypothermia from exposure to temperatures as low as 15 degrees Celsius. They were found after Paris fire service officers used tracker dogs to locate them. Human remains were transported from the Cemetery of the Innocent to the catacombs in 1786, after the cemetery was closed due to overuse. Parts of the catacombs have been a tourist attraction since the late 18th century.
United Airlines sends rapper Schoolboy Q's dog to the wrong city. Just when you realize you haven't heard United Airlines mentioned in the headlines lately, a fresh new PR disaster pops right up. This past weekend, a passenger's pet ended up in the wrong city, and unfortunately for the troubled airline, this particular passenger carries his own mic. On July 14th, rapper Schoolboy Q boarded a flight from Missouri to Burbank, California. During a stopover in Denver, arrangements had been made for a French bulldog puppy he just purchased to be loaded onto his connecting flight. But when Schoolboy Q landed and went to greet his new pet, he was stunned to find someone else's animal in the cage. Turns out the poor little pup had been switched by mistake during the flight transfer and was on his way to Chicago. As you can imagine, the Grammy-nominated artist was none too pleased and voiced his displeasure on Twitter, demanding answers. Thankfully, United managed to locate the puppy, named Yurndamin, and reunited him with his famous owner a few hours later. United issued the disgruntled rapper a full refund and a public apology, but unsurprisingly, Schoolboy Q still has a serious bone to pick with the airline. He told CNN he plans on suing.